guys, I'm Joe, and welcome back to my series of reviews for the original Star Wars trilogy, and we're closing it off with Return of the Jedi, my personal favorite in the entire saga next to Force Awakens. And if anyone feels otherwise out there is watching this, you're probably wondering why the heck is this your favorite? Well, I'll explain why as I go on, but I was really looking forward to reviewing this and getting more into why it's always been my favorite. This is the one I would always watch the most as a kid. There was always something about it. Maybe it was the Ewoks, maybe it was Luke's green lightsaber. I have no idea, but it was always the most watchable one for me. As great as the other two films are, this one, upon watching it last night, I found that it was very easy to sit through, and similar to the first one, a very simplistic and straightforward, yet very fast-paced kind of plot. This movie came out about 34 years ago in 1983, which is quite a long time, and 32 years before The Force Awakens. And after the way Empire Strikes Back ended, a lot of people, of course, were very curious and excited to see if the questions were going to be answered, if Darth Vader was going to be actually Luke's father, if he was lying or not, and we were finally going to get a sense of closure to the characters and see if it would all pay off. Of course, it being long before the sequel trilogy was announced, this was probably the perfect way to end the original trilogy. But unfortunately, in the wake of the response that Empire Strikes Back has received, this one is favored in a somewhat lesser regard as the previous two. And since Chris Stuckman's review of it about 2 years ago, I've heard some more people have come out and said more or less the same of what he said in his review, saying that it was just very rushed and it was disappointing, or it was just kind of meh, or it was just good. Or that, in some cases, I haven't seen the negative reviews, but some people have come out and said that it's one of the worst of the saga. I don't know exactly why, but let's get into this, shall we? And if anyone does feel that way, I don't want you guys to feel like I'm attacking you. I do understand the arguments that people have made about it, and I'm going to be addressing those as I go along, but even so, watching it last night, I still love the movie in spite of all that. I mean, Force Awakens is maybe objectively a somewhat better, coherent film, but even Force Awakens has its flaws too. And guess what? A New Hope has its flaws, and as I've said before in my Empire Strikes Back review, that I had some problems with too. None of the Star Wars movies are above any problems or imperfections. But considering how Empire Strikes Back turned out, it was always going to be hard to follow up on a movie that reached a very certain level of cinematic heights. How exactly do you follow up on that? Well, that's next to impossible, because it's a similar vein to The Dark Knight Rises. After the success of The Dark Knight, how do you follow up in that movie's footsteps? That's a nearly impossible task that I don't think even I could possibly achieve. And I have a feeling that it's going to be a similar situation with Episode 9 after the release of The Last Jedi, but we'll see later down the road how that turns out. And I'll try not to get too wrapped up in how I feel like people tend to criticize this movie a little unfairly, but I'm going to be trying to provide a few interpretations or defenses, if you will, why I think that Return of the Jedi is a little bit better than some people have given it credit for. But Return of the Jedi, similar to Empire Strikes Back, is not directed by George Lucas. It's directed by a man named Richard Marquand, if I'm not mistaken, and it takes place about a year after the events of Empire. Luke, Leia, Lando, and the rest of the gang are coming up with a plan to save Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt, and the Empire is constructing another Death Star, while the Rebel Alliance seizes another opportunity to defeat the Empire once and for all, since the Emperor himself is going to be overseeing the final stages of the Death Star's construction. Just like the previous films or Force Awakens. Simplistic plot, good guys versus bad guys. Is that a problem? I don't think so. So the movie opens above the forest moon of Endor with the new Death Star being constructed, and a Star Destroyer appears from off-screen, similar fashion to A New Hope, and an Imperial shuttle leaves its docking bay and takes off for the Death Star, being escorted by 2 TIE fighters. And it turns out that Darth Vader's the one being transported on that shuttle to notify the commanding officer of the second Death Star that he and the Emperor aren't exactly pleased with how slow the construction of the Death Star is going, and that the Emperor himself is going to be overseeing the final operation. I don't know the name of this guy, Moff Gerard or something or other, I have no idea, but the way he says we shall double our efforts, I don't know how he managed to say that quickly, because I couldn't even say it. I don't think anybody else could, but that must have been the only take that he got it right, because that's pretty impressive. And Vader is still awesomely evil, as he has been in the previous two. But there's a moment in the scene that I never noticed it until I watched it last night. Watch really closely. He just throws up his hand at him.
Lord Vader, this is an unexpected pleasure. We're honored by your presence.
You may dispense with the pleasantries, Commander. I'm here to put you back on schedule.
I just love little gestures like that. It's like him saying, oh, spare me the formalities, pal. We got more important stuff to be talking about. And I just love the look of terror on this guy's face when Vader tells him that the Emperor is about to arrive.
The Emperor's coming here?
That is correct, Commander.
We heard about the Emperor in the first one, and we saw the hologram of Emperor Palpatine, but this is the first time we're actually going to see this guy in person, and he is the leader of the Empire, not Darth Vader. And another indicator that this guy just might be worse than Darth Vader is when Vader says,
I hope so, Commander, for your sake. The Emperor is not as forgiving as I am.
I don't like the sound of that. And then it transitions from the Death Star to the planet Tatooine, with C-3PO and R2-D2 on their way to Jabba's palace to try to figure out what the situation is. And in a similar fashion with 3PO and R2 on Tatooine in the previous one, R2 seems to know what's going on. 3PO, he has no clue what's happening, because apparently Lando and Chewie never came back from the palace, so they're being sent by Luke Skywalker to apparently figure out what the hell's been going on this whole time. They arrive at the palace, and they meet Jabba's guards and his advisor, Babe Fortuna. Ewanawanga. Oh my. Blocha! And it's here we finally see with our own eyes Jabba the Hutt himself. And this movie being over 30 years old, that definitely looks real. It was a puppetry kind of thing, similar to Yoda, but of course a lot bigger, because there was a lot of people underneath that thing, controlling its movements, the tail, the arms, the eyes, the breathing, the mouth movements. I watched his scenes, and I believe that he's actually real. Another accomplishment of practicality. But then R2 shows Jabba and the rest of the people there a message from Luke Skywalker saying, I seek an audience with your excellency to bargain for Solo's life. And as a token of my goodwill, I present to you a gift. These 2 droids. What did he say? Both are hardworking and will serve you well. But of course, Jabba is not willing to cooperate. As it shows, Han Solo's still frozen in carbonite. So 3PO and R2 are taken away to the service droids or whatever they are, and they're given certain assignments. 3PO is a translator/advisor for Jabba. R2 is supposed to be serving drinks on Jabba's sail barge, as we'll see later on. And I don't know why, but seeing this poor droid getting his feet burned, I don't know, I always felt bad for that little guy. No! Now, I've heard some people have problems with the scenes at Jabba's palace, that it goes on for a little too long, and watching it again, yeah, I can see what they're saying, and it probably would have been a lot better if they just started out with Luke coming into the palace and seeing everything that's been going on. But I see it as this. The palace feels actually very alive with all these people and these alien creatures walking around, that it makes it feel like a real place, similar to the previous 2 films like the cantina scene in Mos Eisley. There's always something going on in the background that keeps your attention, and it reminds you of what kind of universe you're living in. From Jabba's advisor to this creature that 3PO almost runs into, which kind of snarls at him. Oh, yeah, and then there's this guy. I hate that laugh. And it kept my attention as a kid. There was always something happening, and it allowed us to see inside Jabba's palace and what exactly he would do, and kind of personality that he has, and why it was such a big deal when Han was reminded that he had to pay off his debts to Jabba. I don't know if I'd call him the Tony Soprano, or maybe the Don Corleone of Tatooine, but he is a gangster, nonetheless. And some of the stuff that he does in here, the way he enslaves Leia, the way he feeds that poor slave to the Rancor during that music band scene, it's just that kind of character that you just love to hate. Speaking of which, that song, which is apparently called Lapti Nek in Star Wars, yes, I am a nerd, once again, it's actually kind of catchy. It has a rock and roll sound to it, even though I have no idea what that singer is saying. There's a blue elephant on the piano. And then there's this person dancing next to the slave. Yeah, I mean, wow. But then what eventually happens is that the slave does something that Jabba doesn't like. She tries to get away, he won't let her, and then he has her drop through the floor to the Rancor pit. And in the special edition for Return of the Jedi, we actually see her down in the cave, but only for maybe like a couple of shots or maybe a couple of seconds. Then the door opens and she looks, and we don't see the Rancor, but we see her get increasingly scared and worried. I did like that part, but I think in a way, hearing her screams and that roar of the Rancor, and then eventually the whole builds sort of that mystery and that suspense of what's going to happen later on with Luke when he goes down there. It's like, okay, whatever's down there, I don't want to be a part of that. And then a bounty hunter shows up with Chewbacca wrapped in handcuffs, offering him to Jabba for a certain reward, for 50,000 credits. But in the end, the bounty hunter accepts 35,000 from Jabba. And then there's this little look that the bounty hunter gives to Boba Fett, who's nearby. This little nod of recognition. People have said it before, but it's like that little bounty hunter pact that they might have in the galaxy that's never really spoken of. It's like a level of respect. And as Chewie's being taken away, we see Lando as one of the guards. And it almost seems to me that once it's revealed that Leia is the bounty hunter, the plan was, for this part of the plan, if it was to work, she and Lando would break Chewie out and Han and escape out of the palace. That's how I see it, in the case that it would work. But later in the middle of the night while everyone's sleeping, the bounty hunter sneaks into the room towards Han Solo frozen in carbonite. The bounty hunter lowers him down and releases him from the carbon, to where if you were watching this for the first time, you'd probably be like, wait a minute, why did this guy let Han Solo loose? What's going on here? I always felt bad for Han when he says, I can't see. Like, oh man. And then Han questions, who are you? And then...
someone who loves you.
That's really cool. But when they try to escape, unfortunately, Jabba discovers them. Han tries to reason with Jabba, doesn't work. He's taken away, and Leia's enslaved. Jabba, I'll pay you triple. You're throwing away fortune here. Don't be a fool! And apparently, the sound of Jabba licking Leia like that was apparently the sound designer's wife's casserole. It's an interesting origin, but... ugh. And one of my favorite parts of this movie is also when Han reunites with Chewie, since he's thrown into the same cell as Chewie's in. A Jedi Knight! Out of it for a while and everybody gets delusions of grandeur. And I love how he just holds Han, because he's so happy to see him again.
All right, pal. All right.
But after those attempts don't work, Luke finally shows up at Jabba's front door. And since this takes place about a year after the events of Empire, being reintroduced to Luke and seeing how far he's come as a person, he's no longer the young, wide-eyed innocent that we met in A New Hope. And he's no longer the weak man that we saw in Empire. And I love how those two guards put the spears in front of him, and he does this. Chokes them out like it's nothing. He makes his way to Jabba's throne room, and despite Jabba's advisor's attempts to keep him out, Luke manages to get through by using the Jedi mind trick. You will take me to Jabba now. Taco to Jabba now. You serve your master well. I will serve my master well, and you will be rewarded. This is by far my favorite performance by Mark Hamill in this entire saga. He is so good as Luke Skywalker, who's now more disciplined and more serious, but yet he still retains his optimism and humanity and care for other people. We'll talk about that earlier with his conversation with Obi-Wan, but since he's a lot more disciplined as a Jedi, I love how he still retains his humanity. Again, more of my favorite lines. Nevertheless, I'm taking Captain Solo and his friends. You can either profit by this or be destroyed.
It's your choice, but I warn you not to underestimate my power.
But as you'd expect, Jabba still doesn't want to come to a truce with Luke, so Luke uses the Force to grab a blaster from one of Jabba's thugs, tries to shoot him. Jabba drops him into the Rancor pit. I love the fact that Luke decided, you know what, this isn't gonna work. Time to take drastic measures. Then we finally see the Rancor, which is a stop-motion model of some kind. Just like Jabba, this creature is so well realized. And I love the look on Luke's face when he sees this thing. It's a small moment, but the way his eyes widen and when he starts to back up, not to get too much into prequel bashing or anything, but it's one of those things where you can actually care about the characters because you feel terrified for them because they're scared of what they're seeing. But that poor guard is eaten by the Rancor, and the Rancor tries to eat Luke a couple times. Luke manages to slip away to one of the doors, tries to open it, doesn't work. But then he uses this big rock and throws it at this button of a door that the Rancor is moving through, and the door closes in on it, killing it with the spikes underneath. Whew. But then the caretaker of this Rancor breaks in, and the other one takes Luke away, and... You know, I have to admit, one time when I was watching this as a kid, I was about 12 years old. It was summer of '02. I was going to this day camp at the time. And there was one day when we were watching Return of the Jedi, and this scene came up where the caretaker starts to cry over losing his pet. And the other one is comforting him. Everybody in the room thought it was funny, and we just lost it. And even now, it's in a way really kind of touching. You feel kind of sorry for the guy and for the Rancor. Oddly, because he tried to eat Luke. It's weird. But in response to Luke killing the Rancor, Jabba decides for a more deadly and severe punishment, feeding him, Han, and Chewie to the pit of Carkoon. As 3PO translates, you will endure a new form of suffering as you're slowly digested over 1,000 years. Second thought, let's pass on that, huh? And I love what Luke says to Jabba in this scene.
You should have bargained, Jabba. That's the last mistake you'll ever make.
Jabba and his guys have no idea what Luke's got in store for them. And Luke is so confident that this is going to work, and it ends up being so, but I just love his confidence in this plan working. Shows you just how far he's come and actually believing in himself, as opposed to how he felt lifting the X-Wing out of the water in the previous one. Oh yeah, and as far as Leia's slave outfit, there was a whole big controversy in some ways with sexualizing a strong female protagonist, that it was somehow degrading to women or something. And on the other side of the coin, a lot of guys fantasize about that. I didn't. I'm sorry, guys, but no disrespect to Carrie Fisher, God rest her soul, but I never really found her that attractive, to be honest. I never really looked at her with all googly eyes or anything. Not that she was bad looking, she was a good looking lady, but I don't know, for some reason, I wasn't really attracted to her in the slightest. And as far as the whole demeaning to women kind of thing, really, what would you do if you were in her position? Obviously, she'd find a way to get out of there, which she ended up doing by choking the guy to death. So, it wasn't just all for nothing. Get over yourselves. Jeez. So Luke, Han, and Chewie are taken to the Sarlacc pit, and before they're forced to go in, Luke gives one final warning to Jabba.
Jabba, this is your last chance. Free us or die.
Of course it doesn't work. R2's up on top of the barge. Luke makes a salute to Leia and R2. Jumps, grabs the diving board, but fires up into the air. A lightsaber shoots out of R2. Luke catches it, turns it on. It's a green one. I can imagine in 1983 when people saw this, they probably went, "Ooh, a green one, that's cool." Nowadays, we're used to seeing green lightsabers, but still, I don't doubt that this was kind of mind-blowing for audiences back then. And he starts slashing away at Jabba's guards. Lando, Han, and Chewie start to fight back and throwing a couple of guys into the Sarlacc pit. And then Boba Fett flies over to try to stop the whole thing. But then Han inadvertently hits Boba Fett's jetpack and he sends him flying across the pit, crashes into Jabba's sail barge, slides down, and gets eaten alive. A lot of people found that very disappointing, considering he was the most badass bounty hunter in the galaxy. Yeah, again, maybe in some book you read, but not in a movie. Like I said in my previous review, he doesn't really do anything. He just kind of walks around, looks cool, and says a couple of things. Maybe in the books and the video games, yeah, but again, just kind of stood around and didn't do anything. Fired a couple shots, but that was it. And I do find it funny the way he dies. He's the most notorious bounty hunter and dies in the dumbest way possible. Bye-bye! And I know what some of you are probably going to say, well, actually in the books, he's still alive. Well, not to harp on the expanded universe too much, which I'm not really familiar with. I don't mean any disrespect to it, but I don't read those, and they're not counted as canon anymore. At least pretty much almost all of it anyway. So I don't care. As far as I'm concerned, unless the Boba Fett spin-off movie's still happening, or it takes place after Return of the Jedi, Boba Fett's dead. End of story. So as the fight continues, Luke makes his way to the other sail barge and starts killing the rest of Jabba's guards. Lando almost falls into the pit. Han and Chewie manage to pull him out, just barely, as the thing tries to pull Lando in. R2 zaps that pet of Jabba's that's torturing poor 3PO, ripping his eye out. Leia aims the cannon at Jabba's deck. They fire it, the whole thing starts to blow up, and they all manage to get away, and there's no chance that Jabba's ever going to give him trouble again. So Luke and the gang take off to their respective locations. Luke goes off to find Yoda to finish his training, and I don't want to focus too much on Chris Stuckman's review of Return of the Jedi, but a point that he brought up with Lando and Han not seeing a big confrontation between the two, that it was just glossed over. I get that, and would I have liked to have seen another scene with them talking over their problems? Yeah, perhaps, but my take is this. Lando was put in a pretty difficult position. Darth Vader probably threatened every single citizen in Cloud City, forcing Lando to betray his friend. And Han and Leia must have thought of that after a while. You know what? If I was in your shoes, I probably would have done the same thing. And plus, he saw that Lando did come back to save him anyway. So he probably figured, you know what, man? Whatever happened, let's put that behind us. Does it break the movie for me like it did Chris Stuckman? No. No, not in the slightest. But that's just one of many things that he over-exaggerated in his review, like Obi-Wan's Force Ghost sitting down on the log being too silly, or Leia's constantly changing outfits throughout the film. Kind of feeds into the somewhat hate parade against Return of the Jedi, where I go, really? You're complaining about stuff like that? That's like something that CinemaSins would talk about, or Screen Junkies, I don't know. But anyway, Luke finally shows up to Yoda's house to complete the training, but unfortunately, Yoda's sick and dying. But not before he tells Luke that he doesn't really require any more training. But there's one thing that he has to do. In order to become a Jedi, he has to confront Vader again. And despite it only being one scene, it was nice to see Yoda at least one more time before he passed. And he still got some of his quirks also.
When 900 years old you reach, look as good you will not.
And he finally confirms to Luke that Vader is his father. And he somewhat demeans Luke for running off to face Vader prematurely. But despite all that, Yoda still sees the potential in Luke after seeing how far he's come. And he tells him, don't underestimate the Emperor's powers or you'll suffer your father's fate. When I die, you're going to be the last of the Jedi. Pass on what you have learned. But in his dying words,
there is another sky.
So finally confirms there is a Skywalker out there, but who? But Yoda's death is really, really sad, and Luke's response to it, it's like, oh, no. And a little while later, Obi-Wan's Force Ghost shows up, and they finally have a talk about Luke's father. And he tells Luke when he first met Anakin, he was a good pilot and was very strong with the Force and took it upon himself to train him as a Jedi. But unfortunately, as we all know, having seen the prequels, it didn't go so well. This is the part of Chris Stuckman's review that I really had a problem with. I don't want to sound like I'm constantly harping on the guy because he was my biggest inspiration for film reviews, but in a similar fashion to him complaining about the fire scene in Spider-Man 2, this part of his review really bothered me when he said that this scene was kind of exposition heavy or just beating you constantly over the head, trying to remind the audience of what Luke had to do in order to become a Jedi. You have to confront Vader. I can't do it. It's too late, you have to do it. I don't want to. No other choice. Come on, Luke has always wanted to know his father. He never knew him up until now. And it also reminds me of the scene in season 1 of the Flash TV show where Barry and Joe have a conversation about being tricked by Harrison Wells. And little sidebar here, it's the same episode that Mark Hamill appears in as the trickster. But when Joe says to Barry,
you always want to be the person who sees the best in people. I wish I could be you.
it's a similar thing I see here in Luke. He doesn't want to believe that his father's all bad, since he's always wanted to know him. Not my words, but words I've heard from other people. I feel like a lot of orphans feel this way about their birth parents. They attribute themselves to whatever their birth parents are like or what they fantasize about them. They don't want to believe that their birth parents are bad people, because if that's the case, then they, the orphan child, must be bad as well. And at this point, Obi-Wan's given up all hope on Darth Vader, saying that he's more machine now than man, twisted and evil. But it makes sense for Luke's character to still believe that his father has some good in him somewhere, and it turns out to be the case later on. So I don't really think it's that beating you over the head kind of thing that Chris Stuckman made it out to be. To be honest, I find that kind of a shallow way to look at it. And it's also where we find out that Leia is Luke's sister. And as Obi-Wan's telling him, as Luke and Leia were hidden from their father when they were born, the Emperor knew that if Anakin were to have a child, they'd be a threat. And Luke starts to ponder it in his heart, and then he says, Leia. Leia's my sister. It's one of those things where you go, no way. I think it's awesome, as I'll address later on, but on the other hand, if only they hadn't had her and Luke kiss each other. Ugh. 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 Speaking of the Emperor, before we saw the scene on Dagobah, we see on the Death Star that the Emperor's finally arrived with almost everybody there in attendance to welcome him aboard the Death Star. And we actually see the Emperor in person. He comes down from his Imperial shuttle. Rise, my friend. The Emperor, or as he's later known as Palpatine, played by Ian McDiarmid, who would later reprise the role in the prequel trilogy. You see him in a black cloak, appearing old and weak, and his skin is all deformed. You get the feeling that years of the dark side have really worn him down. Of course, when you saw the prequels, that wasn't really the case, but I digress. And he and Darth Vader are talking about the Death Star being complete on schedule, how Vader wants to continue his search for Luke, and how they're going to squash the rebellion once and for all. Ian McDiarmid is freaking awesome. His line delivery, in a similar vein to Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin in Spider-Man 1, it's perfect. Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen. Now, since we mentioned the Death Star, a lot of people have problems with the Death Star being here the second time around, and that it's too much like A New Hope. Similar fashion with The Force Awakens, but that's a whole nother story. My interpretation is this. The Emperor tells Luke, when they first meet on the Death Star, right before the battle's about to start, that he planned this whole thing so that when the rebels can come in and finally get the drop on the Death Star, the Imperial fleet will show up and he'll trap them and squash the rebellion once and for all. And he even says, "It was I who allowed the Alliance to know the location of the shield generator. An entire legion of my best troops awaits them." My impression is that the Emperor wanted to finish his plan of a Death Star space station, but he probably figured in light of the exhaust port, alright, I'm gonna build another Death Star, but I'm not gonna make the same mistake again. I'm not gonna let somebody build a big hole in the middle of it that could possibly lead to its destruction. When they come to destroy the Death Star, I will squash them once and for all. They'll never see it coming. If you ask me, I think it's a pretty clever move, and not a lot of people give the Emperor enough credit for that, or they don't really seem to realize he was the one who allowed the Alliance to know where the Death Star was. Very carefully planned and clever, but also pretty overconfident. As Luke says, your overconfidence is your weakness. And yeah, maybe that is a little lazy having another Death Star, but I honestly was okay with it. I didn't mind it in the slightest. So then we see a briefing with the head honchos of the Rebel Alliance. Mon Mothma, Admiral Akbar, and Lando's been promoted to General to lead the attack on the Death Star. Han Solo will lead a team down on the Endor moon and destroy the shield generator. So Lando's assigned to fly the Falcon. Han reluctantly allows him to fly it, since he's very close and personal to this thing. They all go their separate ways to go on their missions. They arrive at the Endor moon, trying to use some kind of a cover story to get past the security. But since Vader was sent on that command ship, he senses Luke's presence on the shuttle, and Luke senses him also. "I'm endangering the mission. I shouldn't have come." It's your imagination, kid. But they manage to let him go through. They land on the planet, and they come across a couple of scout troopers nearby, and they try to find a way to get past them without being seen. And I love this little moment between Luke and Han.
Quietly. There might be more of them out there. Hey, it's me.
That's not a good sign. And of course, he ends up blowing their cover. The scout troopers try to get away. Han gets into a scuffle with one of them. Luke and Leia take off to chase off after the others, which leads into the speeder bike scene. I love this scene. Do some of the shots hold up? Well, honestly, I don't really care, because the scene is still entertaining, and the fact that there's no music in there actually makes it kind of work for some reason. I don't know why.
Quick, jam their comm link, center switch!
And a lot of these scenes on Endor were filmed in the Redwood Forest in California, which would explain how thick the tree trunks are and how tall these things are. Like with the previous films, definitely feels like a real location. It doesn't feel like a movie set. But everything about this chase sequence I really like. From Luke and Leia speeding up towards that one speeder, Luke jumping on the other one, and throwing the scout trooper into the tree. I love the sound that guy makes when he hits the tree. It's so funny. And from them getting separated as a couple more scout troopers show up, and as they crash into the trees, therefore, the Imperials don't know about their presence. And I also like it when Luke slices this one speeder in half. I love the sound of the speeder when it starts spinning around. Weird. Luke manages to regroup with Han, but then they go off to find Leia since she didn't come back. And then it cuts to Leia, unconscious on the ground, and a little creature that looks like a teddy bear and is known as an Ewok shows up and wakes her up. And now we're in the part that is very, very divisive among Star Wars fans, and maybe some movie fans, the Ewoks. A lot of people consider this to be when George Lucas started to lose his touch. And a lot of people think that it's on the same level as Jar Jar or the Gungans, or that it was the predecessor of the whole thing. Be that as it may, I personally have no problems with the Ewoks. I think they're fine. Are they really necessary? Not really, no. Do they need to be in there? No. But, as opposed to Jar Jar and the Gungans, they actually serve a purpose. If they feel that someone is a threat to them, they are going to take action. And when they discovered that the Imperials were invading their home, they assisted the rebels in taking it back from them. And they actually helped defeat the Empire, as far as destroying the shield generator is concerned. And that one Ewok who discovers Leia, his name is Wicket, apparently, but he was played by a young kid at the time, Warwick Davis? I don't know. Who would have thought that this was the same guy who played Professor Flitwick in Harry Potter? Wingardium Leviosa. As Luke and Han are trying to find Leia, Chewie discovers this dead animal, and he tries to eat it, but then, as it turns out, it ends up trapping the rest of the gang.
Chewie, wait, don't!
Nice work. Great, Chewie. Great. Always thinking with your stomach. And another thing, I'm going to mention the humor a lot, but I love Han's reaction when Luke asked him if he could reach his lightsaber.
Han, can you reach my lightsaber? Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, piece of cake. But R2 ends up cutting them loose and they fall down pretty hard, and then as they start to get up, they realize they're surrounded by more Ewoks. And when they see 3PO, they all somehow think he's some kind of a god or something, and they all start bowing to him. Yeah, it's a little cheesy, it's a little stupid, but it's a little funny. Especially when Han says this.
Well, why don't you use your divine influence and get us out of this?
And the rest of the exchange between the two. And watch Mark Hamill as they're saying this stuff.
I beg your pardon, General Solo, but that just wouldn't be proper.
Proper?
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
Oh, that is so great. I love it. But this is where I think the movie kind of slows down, and there's really not much story stuff happening. They're just kind of hanging around with the Ewoks, telling stories around the campfire, but beforehand they're almost being cooked by them. It's a little stupid, and I don't really see how that's going to happen. And I heard Jeremy John say in his review that if these things were Wookiees, it probably would have made it a lot better and a lot more understandable that they were able to defeat the Empire. Yeah, I could definitely see that, but in the end, I think it's okay. Again, I don't mind them. But on the other hand, it makes a really cool moment when Luke uses his Force abilities to make 3PO look like he has magic or something in order to scare the Ewoks into freeing the rest of the gang. And at the end, when Luke says, "Thanks, 3PO. Never knew I had it in me." And after 3PO tells the stories of the past adventures around the campfire, they're accepted into the tribe. Again, not much story stuff is happening, but whatever, it's harmless. It's not like it's F+ material or anything, okay, people? Get over yourselves. But after feeling that something isn't right, Luke goes outside and Leia follows after him. And it leads to a really great scene where Luke finally reveals the truth to Leia about her heritage. And how he says that he doesn't remember his mother and never knew her, and that Leia only remembers images of her mother. Very beautiful, kind, but sad. And when it got to this part, Chris Stuckman made it sound like that it was Return of the Jedi's fault that this was a continuity error in Revenge of the Sith. Hold on. First of all, it's not this movie's fault that doesn't line up in the Revenge of the Sith. It's the prequel's job to make sure that it lines up with the original trilogy, not the other way around. It makes me wonder, are you really that blinded by your love of Empire and your strong dislike of the prequels that you're just looking for stuff to complain about in this one? Come on, man. Again, no disrespect to Chris Stuckman, but still, I couldn't help but go, dude, you are just looking for stuff to bitch about. Seriously, I mean, come on. Nevertheless, it's still a really great scene in how he slowly reveals the truth to Leia in those famous words.
Force is strong in my family. My father has it. I have it. And my sister has it.
Same words we heard in one of the teaser trailers for Force Awakens. And I like how Leia says that deep down she feels like she's always known, that there was some kind of connection between the two. Although, I have to admit, I would have liked to have seen at least one scene where Leia realizes, wait a minute, if Vader's Luke's father, and I'm his sister, then Vader's my father too. I can imagine that she probably had a similar response like Luke did when he discovered the truth. And it was never really intended for them to be siblings to begin with, but the way the scene is played out, and the lighting with him in the dark, her in the light, since he tells her that he may not make it back and she's the only hope for the Alliance if that happens, in time, you will learn to use that power as I have. That whole scene, it just makes me look past those things. I love that scene. Is that me being blinded by my nostalgia and my ability to reason? Well, perhaps, but hey, love is so powerful, you can look past all the small stuff. And then we go to the scene on the Imperial platform when Vader shows up, and Luke turns himself into the Imperials. And they have that first confrontation that they've had in a while, where it's just them talking, and they're kind of playing at each other with words a little bit.
It is the name of your true self you've only forgotten. I know there is good in you. The Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully.
And Luke does turn out to be right, because if you remember in Empire, Vader tries to reason with Luke. Listen, join me. Imagine what we can do together. We can rule this galaxy as father and son. that since he discovered that Luke was his son, he was probably thinking, look, we can redeem our father-son relationship. If there wasn't any good in Vader, if he wanted to kill Luke, he would have done it at Cloud City. And it's in this scene where we get a slightly more in-depth look underneath that mask. It is too late for me, son. The Emperor will show you the true nature of the Force. He is your master now. And my father is truly dead. And then when he's taken away, Vader goes over to the edge and has a moment to himself. It almost seems to me like he's saying, maybe he's right. Maybe there is something deep down in me that I haven't really thought about. It's another indicator that maybe Darth Vader is not as bad as he appeared all along. This is the best part of the movie for me. Despite whatever you think about the other parts of this movie, no one can deny that this aspect of the movie is the best part and what still makes this movie memorable to this day. Luke trying to bring his father back, Vader trying to bring his son to the dark side and also protect him from the Emperor and all that stuff. The battle between those two. This is the best part of the whole movie. And Luke trying to resist the temptation from the Emperor. Oh my god, I love that stuff. That is like A+ material. I love that stuff. And I cannot talk about Return of the Jedi without mentioning the space battle above Endor. Oh my god, that whole space battle alone. Perfection. The space battle in Rogue One is pretty cool, but this is probably my favorite space battle out of all the movies so far. From the musical score by John Williams, which, once again, it's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it at all. That is some of the best parts of the score in this movie. Particularly in this scene where you see the ships getting ready to go into hyperspace. God, I love it. And also the music when they finally arrive at the Death Star. The way the music goes in this part. Love it. They're getting ready to go in for the kill on the Death Star, but then Lando realizes that, wait a minute, how could they be jamming us if they don't know we're coming? Break off! Break off! And then, of course, the famous line.
It's a trap!
And then the TIE fighters and interceptors come in and the battle starts. And the way the ships move and the dogfights and everything. Oh my god, I don't know how else to say it. Down on the planet, Han, Leia, and Chewie and the rest of the gang try to find a way to sneak in through the back door to plant the charges on the shield generator. And thanks to one Ewok that manages to steal one of the speeder bikes and distract most of the scout troopers away, they manage to break into the place and start setting the charges, but unfortunately an Imperial force storms the place and captures them. And on the Death Star, Luke and Vader have their meeting with the Emperor. Your overconfidence is your weakness. Your faith in your friends is yours. And Luke sees the rebel fleet being assaulted by the Imperials, and the Emperor is taunting him. Give in to your anger. Strike me down. No, it is unavoidable. You, like your father, are now mine. And down on Endor, as Han and Leia are being taken away by the Imperials, 3PO and R2 lure a couple of stormtroopers off to them, and all of a sudden... And the battle on the planet Endor starts. The Ewoks show up with crossbows, bolas, and rocks, and flying gliders, and some booby traps, like logs, crushing the AT-STs, making one AT-ST slip and crash, throwing down rocks on top of stormtroopers. Okay, some of that is a little cheesy, it's a little ridiculous, I can admit that, but I think it's kind of funny, and the idea of teddy bears with those kind of weapons defeating a highly trained army, yeah, probably would not happen. But you know what? As I said, they serve a purpose, and they actually help the rebels defeat the Empire, as opposed to Jar Jar and his friends, the Gungans, running away from the droids. You don't need to hear me say that, but I will take the Ewoks over Jar Jar any day of the week. And plus, there is some sort of an endearing nature to the Ewoks, considering how kind of cuddly they are. Yeah, I know. The way that one hugs Harrison Ford's leg earlier, which, as the actor said...
Now, I got to hug Harrison Ford's leg, which makes women jealous.
Yeah, I can imagine. And plus, when that one Ewok dies and his friend goes to his side and starts to mourn his loss, it's actually a little sad. If you don't feel sorry for that one Ewok, you, sir or ma'am, are a robot. I'm sorry. So Han and Leia during the battle try to break back in through the door. Han tries to hotwire it, doesn't work. Leia gets shot. They get cornered for a second by stormtroopers, and right before she kills both of them...
I love you.
I know.
It's reversed, but it's a nice callback to the previous film. And Chewie shows up in a stolen AT-ST where he managed to wipe out some of the Imperial forces nearby. Han comes up with a plan in order to lure the remaining Imperial personnel out of the area. Meanwhile, above the planet, we learn that the Death Star is actually fully operational, because it was mentioned before that it wasn't operational. That is until the Emperor orders the commanding general to fire on one of the rebel ships.
Fire!
Despite Admiral Akbar's attempts to withdraw the fleet, Lando insists on sticking around and giving Han more time to disable the shield generator. So he orders an attack on the nearby Imperial Star Destroyers. We'll last longer than we will against that Death Star, and we might just take a few of them with us. Lando's awesome in this battle, no question. But then, the Emperor taunts Luke.
Strike me down with all of your hatred, and your journey towards the dark side will be complete.
Luke tries to resist. But then all of a sudden, he pulls a lightsaber away with the Force. And it looks like he's gonna strike. I'm pretty sure that's what he was gonna do. Strike the Emperor down, but Vader pulls out his lightsaber and stops him. In a way, Vader saves his son. He does care, and he knows what the Emperor's capable of. So the fight goes on, Luke puts up a pretty good fight and actually kicks Vader down the stairs, and the Emperor says,
"Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Let the hate flow through you."
And Luke realizes what he's just done, turns off his lightsaber, says, I'm not doing this. But Vader forces him to doing it again anyway. Then he jumps onto the walkway, and after exchanging a few more words,
If you will not fight, then you will meet your destiny.
In retrospect, that was probably a reference to the high ground scene in Revenge of the Sith. Vader knows he's not going to win that battle again. So Luke disappears in the shadows of the wreckage of the walkway. Darth Vader goes down the stairs to look for him. Though he must have some infrared glasses, so he might be able to see where Luke is. More than likely, obviously, he was taunting him to try to get him to come out. He's taunting him, saying, "You cannot hide forever, Luke. I will not fight you. Give yourself to the dark side. It is the only way you can save your friends." And I love this image of Luke standing in the shadow. Half of his face is in the light, half of it is in the dark. He's trying so hard to resist. And as I said with the dynamic between him and Vader being A+ material, his arc in here is so well realized. As far as all the Jedi Knights that we've seen in the main saga so far, Luke is probably the most relatable Jedi that we've seen by far. Because he faces a lot of temptation, he's got all this weight on his shoulders to bring that Jedi Order back. He could fall into the dark side at any minute. He almost fell into it just a little while ago with the Emperor, and here, he's tempted again. And the shading, so poetic. And as Vader's taunting him, he reads his mind and discovers that Luke has a sister and Vader has a daughter. And after discovering this, Vader says,
If you will not turn to the dark side, then perhaps she will.
Luke is swinging and smashing away at Darth Vader's lightsaber, and the way Darth Vader starts to back up as Luke is swinging away at him, it's like he's saying, "Oh crap, I probably should okay, I definitely should not have said that." And he corners him on one of the walkways, and he continues to hammer away at Vader's lightsaber, and then he cuts off Vader's hand, and he wins. And the Emperor starts to laugh, saying, "Your hate has made you powerful. Fulfill your destiny, and take your father's place at my side." I guarantee you, if the Emperor had just kept his mouth shut and not said that, Luke probably would have fallen into the dark side, without a doubt. But once he said that, Luke calms himself down and he looks at his hand, and he looks at Vader's hand, and he realizes what he's about to become. He is slowly turning into Darth Vader. He takes a deep breath and uses the discipline that Obi-Wan and Yoda taught him and says, "Never. I'll never turn to the dark side."
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Always puts a smile on my face. Love it. So after Luke tells the Emperor that he's not going to play his game, the Emperor doesn't like that too much. So therefore he goes, "If you will not be turned, you will be destroyed." In the years that follow, we have seen Force lightning used in the prequel trilogy, but still, I can imagine that a lot of people, when they saw this in 1983, they were probably horrified by that, in a similar fashion that I first felt when you saw Scarecrow using the fear toxin on Batman in Batman Begins. Ugh! How do you fight that? He continues to torture him and taunt him. Luke doesn't resist. Vader gets up and he stands by and watches, and therefore is my favorite part of not just this whole movie, but the entire saga so far. The Emperor torturing Luke with the Force lightning, Luke screaming out in agony, begging his father to help him, the camera work focusing on Vader's mask, the music, Vader looking back and forth to the Emperor, back to Luke. You can tell that Vader's conflicted about this. Luke has finally gotten through to him, and he realizes that there is good in him after all. And seeing how much he cares for his son, he decides, you know what? I'm not going to be your servant anymore. My son is the most important thing to me right now. You mean nothing. And as he's looking back and forth, if you're watching this for the first time, you would probably say to him, dude, come on, do it. Kill him. Kill the Emperor. And then... so satisfying. But unfortunately, as Vader picked up the Emperor, the Force lightning struck Vader's mask, therefore short-circuiting his breathing apparatus, and he doesn't have much time to live. So Luke starts to drag him away towards the Imperial shuttle in order to get away. Meanwhile, Han has managed to destroy the shield generator, therefore giving an opening for Lando and the rest of the gang to fly into the Death Star and destroy it. They fly into the core, being chased by Imperial TIE fighters, and also the Rebel fleet manages to destroy the Imperial command ship when it crashes into the Death Star. The Empire is not doing so well right now, and there's so many satisfying moments, like Admiral Akbar sitting back going, and then there's a scene of Vader dying, which, it's beautiful. Yeah, I don't see any other way to describe it. It's beautiful, and it's touching. Seeing Luke carrying Vader away while all the other Imperial personnel are escaping the Death Star, and they're not even paying attention to what's happening. I've heard Chris Stuckman say that it was very sobering. I guess that's the right way to look at it. So Luke drags him to the ship, and Vader says, "Help me take this mask off, Luke. But you'll die. Nothing can stop that now. Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes." I read somewhere online that those words that he said is the final rejection of all the lies and promises that the Emperor gave Anakin. Shows you that Anakin Skywalker is now back. Luke takes off his mask and reveals this. I still sort of remember my first response to that scene, going, what the? And then when he talks, you're like, wow, it makes sense now why he treats people the way he does. Because he's that damaged. And when you see the prequels, regardless of how you feel about them, despite all the evil stuff that he did, you can't help but feel sorry for this poor guy. And with his dying words, "You've already saved me, Luke. Tell your sister that you were right about me." And then he dies. Let me tell you, I almost teared up watching this. It was out of control. And seeing Luke breaking down in tears, oh man. Then Lando and Wedge Antilles fly into the main reactor of the Death Star, destroy it, and then the Death Star starts to explode. They barely manage to escape. Lando cheers out in victory with his co-pilot, who I didn't mention earlier is actually kind of cool. Don't worry, my friend's down there. He'll have that shield down on time. Or this will be the shortest offensive of all time. The Death Star blows up. The Empire has been defeated. Han and Leia see the explosion, and Han starts to worry that Luke might have been on board when that thing exploded, but Leia says, "No, I can feel it. He wasn't on there." And how kind of Han to say, "You know what, when he comes back, don't worry, I won't get in the way." And Leia goes, "No, Han, it's not like that. He's my brother." So, yeah, dude, you got nothing to worry about. In the funeral scene with Luke burning Darth Vader's armor, another emotional payoff. And he's the only one in attendance. Well, at least his son showed up and honored his memory. And then it cuts to the Ewok celebration of the Empire's defeat with the song Yub Nub. And them playing congas on the stormtroopers' helmets. Again, it's a little stupid, but I don't care. I like it. Everybody's happy that the Empire's been defeated. Luke reunites with Han and Leia. So satisfying. And it almost brings a tear to my eye, seeing that how everything's finally come to a close. And then he looks over to the side. He sees Obi-Wan and Yoda's ghosts. And then this older gentleman shows up. And then you go, what? Who's that? Oh my god, that's Darth Vader! Played by the late Sebastian Shaw. So as Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin's Force Ghost look on, Luke rejoins the celebration, and then there's the final shot of all of them celebrating, and the movie ends. In a similar fashion with other movies like Spider-Man 2, The Dark Knight Rises, and The Deathly Hallows Part 2, this I think is a perfect way to end the series. Even though it turns out to not be the case in the long run, it's still a great ending to this trilogy. Overall, while Return of the Jedi may have some flaws here and there, and it's not a perfect movie, but then again, none of the other movies are perfect either, I still can't help but love this movie in spite of all those things. Even if you're not a big fan of some of the stuff that's in here, you cannot deny the Vader and Luke scenes. That part is perfect. And it's probably the reason why you tolerate a lot of the other stuff. I don't feel cheated like I didn't get my money's worth. I don't feel like it was a disappointing finale like you see in some TV shows. And there's a lot of great moments in here too that still makes the movie memorable and some of the reason why it's still talked about all these years later. Am I a blind fanboy? Well, you can say so, but hopefully I presented my points as reasonably as I could. It's still my favorite next to The Force Awakens. Shoot me. I love it, and nobody will take that away from me. Those are my thoughts on Return of the Jedi, and those are my thoughts on the original Star Wars trilogy. Thank you guys for watching these. I had a lot of fun talking about this, and I've already done videos on The Force Awakens, but I'd like to do a more in-depth review on that one day. Hopefully when the time is right. But I would definitely like to go more in-depth about it, because that movie, there's so much I could talk about it. But again, I'll save that for a later date. But to think about it, The Last Jedi is in about a week. I apologize. So, what are your guys' thoughts on Return of the Jedi? Love it? Like it? Think it's okay? Or do you dislike it or hate it? Whatever the case is, I am prepared for it. Comment below and tell me your thoughts, and I will see you guys next time.